to the body itself, you said that you took some as-is photographs, and I would ask you to refer in your book there to, and if you need to remove those from that book to be more discreet, however you need to do it, it's
Okay.
fine.
Thank you.
But State's Exhibit number 231 and 232, could you personally look at those and tell me if those are the as-is photographs that you were talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we're going to go through this process in a way where, rather than displaying them, I'm going to just ask you to describe
Sure.
what you're seeing for purposes of the record. And that way, if there's any question about it later, they can refer back to your testimony.
Okay.
So with regard to State's Exhibit number 231 and 232, the as-is photographs, would you please describe what you're looking at in those photographs?
So there are two of them because one is the upper half of her body, including her head and face, and then the second one is the lower half of her body, including her legs and feet. And so basically how I received her is that she is naked, there's no clothing, and both of her hands are covered with brown paper bags, as I referred to previously, that are actually secured around her wrists with tape. And then her body was covered with kind of a brownish dirt silt appearance, and there was also fragments of vegetation within the body bag and within her scalp hair.
And just for understanding for the jury, when you take the photograph, is there anything that is covered up on the body as you are taking the photograph?
No.
Okay. Those documents, though, State's Exhibit number 231 and 232, have certain portions of that photograph been covered just for discretion's sake.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, let's go ahead. We're going to look at your autopsy report, and I think we can do this without the light off. The first thing you do is the external examination. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And can you just kind of describe in general terms what is involved in the external examination?
So the external examination is also standard process for any postmortem examination. And I always describe it as I start on one side of the body, say a foot, work my way up the entire side of that body to the head, and then to the opposite side of the body. And what I'm looking for is evidence of natural disease, evidence of trauma, any potentially identifying features like hair color, eye color, tattoos, scars, etc. Lots of different things. And once I'm done kind of looking at, and then lastly we will roll the body so that I can see the back of the body. And then once that's complete, that's the end of the external examination.
And as part of this external examination, do you photograph the body both before and after it is, I guess for lack of a better word, cleaned?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe, once the as-is photographs are taken, what happens next?
So once the as-is photographs are taken, we would collect trace evidence, if again, depending on the type of case, but you would not want to do that after you've cleaned the body. So we'll collect any trace evidence, and then fingerprint the body, and then we will clean the body. And that way you remove any clothing, any evidence of medical intervention, any dirt, blood, etc., so that you can see the body in its entirety.
Now, I noticed in your report, and I believe we're still on page 1, that you talked about the hair being wet.
Yes, sir.
Was that from being cleaned or something else?
No, it was received that way.
And commonly in an autopsy, if a person had been wearing clothes at the time that they were deceased, what would you receive? Just the body or something else?
If they had clothing on at the time that they were pronounced, the clothing would still be on the body, or clothing that may be with the body come with the body.
And was any clothing brought to you with the body of Athena Strand?
No, sir.
Now, with regard to the evidence of the body itself, can you just kind of give us, you weigh the body?
Yes, sir.
All right. And what was the weight of this little girl?
The weight is 67 pounds.
And what was the height or measurement?
52 inches.
And in layman's terms, or feet and inches? I
Oh,
don't
man,
know.
make me do math. I'm showing my Terra County son. I'm just so 60 inches is 5 feet, so she's 8 inches below that, so that's...
4 feet, 4 inches?
Sounds good, yes. I'm so embarrassed.
That's all right. I think the judge would say you did go to Texas A&M. So.
Oh, no.
So did I.
Oh.
With regard to, so Athena's 67 pounds, 4 feet, 4 inches, is that correct? And what was some of the observations that you made during the external examination of Athena's body?
So I already mentioned that she was received naked, no clothing received with the body. There's no jewelry on the body. In addition, like I said, the surface of the body were covered with brown dirt or silt, and there was fragments of brown vegetation within the scalp hair and on the surfaces of her body. She also has what we call pruning or washerwoman changes in the skin of her hands and feet. Other than that, she had some evidence of injury, which is much more extensive than just what I'm describing.
And let's talk about that. Not specifically what the injuries are at this point, but when you open the body bag and you see the body of this little girl, describe for the jury sort of where you're seeing the injuries on her body just from first look.
My initial impression, the first thing I thought is that she is completely congested from the neck up, meaning that it's much darker due to blood kind of being in that area of the body. Trying to think of a better way to describe congested, but it was just, you could tell that there was something going on in the head and neck area. That's before we even cleaned the body.
And congestion, is that related? It's hard. I want to kind of give a lay person's understanding what that means.
It's the best way to describe it is blood's backed up in the vasculature.
And I'm not sure I understand anymore, but what's vasculature?
So all the blood vessels that circulate blood throughout your body are the vasculature system. So it's arteries, veins, and connecting those two are capillaries.
And is that something that you see in certain types of deaths versus others?
Yes?
And can you describe that for the jury, please?
Well, let me say congestion on its own as an isolated finding can be nonspecific. And you can see it in sudden cardiac deaths. You can see it in drownings. You can see it in asphyxial type deaths. So it's nondescript on its own, but a constellation of findings can be more helpful when you're making a diagnosis.
And when you're saying a constellation of findings, are you talking about the overall findings taken together?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, once she was cleaned up, could you still see this congestion, the blood near the skin, from her basically mid-chest to the top of her head?
Yes, sir.
And would the fact, I guess I have to frame it to you in a hypothetical situation, if a person had received injuries close to the time of their death and then was immediately put in a cooler type situation, either a colder body of water or a cooler like you have in your laboratory, would that essentially sort of,
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
what would that do? Sorry.
Okay, your objection to leading is overruled based on the last statement.
So if I'm repeating your question,
Yes.
if someone had those findings and then died, would they be altered by being put into a cooler?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Would it slow the normal rate of something that might change the appearance over time?
So the coolness of the cooler is to preserve the condition of the body by decreasing the rate of decomposition. That's just a known fact that decomposition slows when it's cold.
So if a body were put into a colder body of water in November. Would that also help slow the rate of decomposition?
Yes, sir.
Now, with regard to the body of Athena Strand, we're talking about the external examination. Were there further, go to the next page. This is the page 2, that states exhibit number 274. You kind of went on to describe some more of the findings in the external examination.
Yes, sir.
And I don't necessarily feel like you have to read every word, but if you would give it sort of a synopsis and then maybe also explain as best you can in layperson's terms so we can understand it as well.
Sure. Just starting from the top.
Yes.
So basically, I even mentioned that the head and face exhibit trauma. There's generalized congestion of the head and face, which I just mentioned. I note that her hair is blonde and it's wavy and it's long and that it's damp. And then her eyes are green in color. When you look at the whites of her eyes and the lining of her eyes, you see florid petechial hemorrhages, which are florid just means they're everywhere. Petechial hemorrhages specifically refer to these tiny pinpoint hemorrhages that you see throughout the eyes. Let's see. She has her teeth are kind of a mixture of what we call deciduous teeth and erupting adult teeth, which is appropriate for a 7-year-old. The neck has trauma, the chest is trauma. I did not appreciate any trauma on her vagina or within her vagina. The vaginal hymen is present and it's intact. I did examine her anus. She had some fecal material on the perianal skin, but I did not see any trauma to her anus. And then her extremities, so the arms and the legs, also showed trauma. Her fingernails are all intact, but the fingernails themselves are dirty. The toenails are also short and dirty. The soles of her feet are dirty, but otherwise unremarkable. And then the back has trauma.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit as we go through this, because there are some photographs, I believe, that correspond to some of these things. Specifically, State's Exhibit number 235, could you examine that and tell me what you see in that photograph? $235.
Sorry, I kind of juggled this. Yes, sir.
If you just give a brief description of what's shown in that photograph.
So a standard photograph that we take on all of our postmortem examinations is what we call an identification photograph. So it will be a picture of the decedent's face with a number placard with that IFS number, the unique identifying number for that decedent.
And on that placard, if you use that as a cutoff in the picture, meaning you can see what's below and what's above it, do you see a marked difference between what is displayed above that placard from her mid-chest up than what's below that placard?
Yes, sir.
And can you describe what that difference is?
So again, you can still appreciate the congestion in her head and face, and you can see multiple types of blunt force injuries, essentially from the middle of her upper chest to the top of her head.
And going on to look at, there's a series of them. I believe it's 236, 237, 238, 239, 240, and 241. Do those show her eyes on both sides of her face?
Yes, sir.
And you described, I believe, what you referred to as florid petechial hemorrhages. We're not going to be showing these to the jury at this point, so can you kind of describe, as you're looking at the photograph itself, whichever photographs you think best shows it, identify that photograph and describe what you see there as the florid petechial hemorrhages.
Sorry, let me... So in State's Exhibit 236 and 238, they are photographs of the right eye, showing petechial hemorrhages in the whites of the eye, which is called the sclera, and within the lining of the eyes, which is called the conjunctiva. And then same for State's Exhibit 239 and 241.
And what is the significance or possible significance of finding these florid petechial hemorrhages in the eyes, such as in the case of Athena Strand?
Again, as an isolated finding, can be very nonspecific. You can see them in different types of deaths. Sometimes sudden cardiac death, you can have those. Sometimes depending on what position that you die in, you can see those. So as an isolated finding, petechial hemorrhages are not diagnostic, but again, taken in a constellation of findings can be.
And taken into the constellation of findings in this case, was that significant to you?
Yes,
In what way?
because it wasn't just petechial hemorrhages in the eyes, it was her entire face, basically her entire head, with all of that congestion. So it implies that blood is pooling in that region of the head.
And what are the possible causes of that kind of blood pooling in those regions of the head?
So my big concern was that there was an asphyxial component to this death.
And you say asphyxial component, can you explain that to the jury?
Asphyxia is a fancy word. It's a mechanism for how somebody can die, and there's different types of asphyxial deaths, because you don't just spontaneously asphyxiate. There needs to be an explanation for why it occurred. But basically it means that the body is starved of oxygen. Either the blood supply is cut off or not able to supply blood, especially to the brain or the airway, or the person is not able to actually breathe and get that oxygen into the body. So examples of asphyxial death: smothering, strangulation, mechanical asphyxia, chemical asphyxia, carbon monoxide is an example. But that's an overview of asphyxia.
Understood. So you said smothering and strangulation are one of the possible
Two
signs.
possibilities.
Two possibilities of asphyxia.
Yes.
And you understand that in this particular case, that the defendant, Tanner Horn, has pled guilty to the offense that he was charged with.
Yes, sir.
And that was by causing the death of Athena Strand by smothering and or strangling and or asphyxiating Athena Strand with his hands, his feet, or his body.
Yes, sir.
Does that make sense, given the findings that you're describing right here?
Yes, sir.